Okay, here we go. This is the last chapter, or last chapter, nope. This is the last video for chapter 3. There's a lot more to chapter 3, and please make sure you read it all, and we'll discuss it very quickly in class, but I'm not going to make another video for ecological or environmental services. We'll talk about them very briefly in class, so make sure you're reading. We're going to go over the nitrogen cycle and the phosphorus cycle. Nitrogen cycle is my favorite. Boy, I can tell you all about this one. I love the nitrogen cycle. Primarily because it's really challenging and I like a challenge. So the nitrogen cycle. There are 5 steps in the nitrogen cycle and you need to know them, and you need to know the order, and you need to know what each does. It's very important. This cycle comes up a lot, and if you know it, you'll ace this sucker. So they are nitrogen fixation, nitrification, assimilation, ammonification, oops, that should have 2 M's, and denitrification. I use FixNAD to actually remember it. Actually, I've done this enough that I don't need FixNAD anymore, but it's a great way for you to memorize it, and I will ask you what FixNAD means in class. So here we go. First step in the nitrogen cycle, nitrogen fixation. Almost every single one of these steps is done by bacteria, but a few other things can do it too. So your bacteria, lightning, and your legumes. They have nodules on their roots that have bacteria in them that will perform or convert nitrogen. This is one of the most important steps because it takes nitrogen gas. 78% of our atmosphere is nitrogen gas. I can't talk all of a sudden. And it converts it first to ammonia, NH3, and then it converts it again to ammonium, NH4+. Plants can use ammonia and ammonium. They don't like them so much, but if there's no other nitrogen available, they will use them. So now it can get into the food chain. As nitrogen gas, it cannot. So we eliminate all those bacteria, and we are going to have a problem. The next step, also done by bacteria, is nitrification. Nitrification occurs primarily in soil. It takes the ammonium from the nitrogen fixation, converts it to nitrate, and then another nitrifying bacteria converts it to nitrate. Nitrate is the least toxic of all of these, and this is the one the plants prefer. They will use nitrate again, and they will use ammonium, but they prefer nitrate if they can get it. Okay, so now it gets absorbed or assimilated. It gets assimilated, taken into the food web. So plants absorb the nitrogen, nitrate, most likely, from the roots, and it enters into our food web, and it's made into your proteins. So nitrogen is a big component of our proteins. So now it's in our proteins. How do we get our nitrogen? We consume our nitrogen by consuming the plants or the cow or the chicken who ate the plant. So now it travels as in the food through the food chain. Okay, so now it's stuck in the food chain for a while. Then what happens? Okay. Then, when it's eliminated from the body or the food chain, it occurs. Jazz, knock it off. Sorry, my dogs keep interrupting me tonight. I should probably do this at school. This is so much fun. You need a little doggy bark in the background, right? Ammonification. That's the next step. Again, done by bacteria, fungus, and decomposers. It takes waste and dead organisms and converts them back into ammonium. Now this ammonium here is in the soil, so it could go back through nitrification and then be assimilated right back into the food chain, or it can go to denitrification. Denitrification again occurs by bacteria, but in areas where the soil is hypoxic meaning very low in oxygen, or waterlogged soil that's very, very wet. Soil that's very wet has very little oxygen in it. So in a low oxygen environment, the ammonium will be converted back into N2, nitrogen gas, and be released to the atmosphere once again. That is the down and dirty of the nitrogen cycle. You got to practice it, and you got to write it again and again and again because you need to know it. So we're going to do that in class. So one day, either towards the end of this week probably or next week, you're going to walk in and I'm going to say, okay, write the nitrogen cycle on your desk, and here we go. Okay, here's a few things you can use to help yourself. I told you about FixNAD. Okay. Nitrogen fixation, nitrification, assimilation, ammonification, denitrification. Helps you remember the order. ANPAN, A-N-P-A-N. These are actually the products from each of the stages. So nitrogen fixation makes ammonium. Nitrification makes nitrate. Assimilation makes protein. Ammonification makes ammonium again. And then denitrification makes nitrogen gas. This nitrogen gas can go around and get fixed and back in it goes. Or again, this ammonium can go back over and get converted to nitrate and back into the food chain it can go. And of course, nitrogen can sit in any of these forms at any time, but most nitrogen is in the atmosphere. And again, we talked about stores for the atmosphere, or for nitrogen. The primary store for nitrogen is our atmosphere, because 78% of our atmosphere is N2, nitrogen gas. Okay. Phosphorus cycle. Really quick. Here's the one thing you need to know about the phosphorus cycle. It does not have a gaseous stage. It is not found in the atmosphere. It's found in water, it's found in the ground, it's found in us, but it is not found in the atmosphere. There is no gas stage in the atmosphere. Its store is rocks, lots of it in rocks. That's where most of it is stored and where it's coming from, and then it makes its way into water and into our food chain. It's absorbed by plants and stuff like that. Okay. Humans are impacting actually both of these by the use of fertilizers. There is nitrogen and phosphorus in our fertilizers, so our fertilizers are causing lots of problems. We are eliminating phosphorus and nitrogen from the ground through agriculture. We harvest and remove all the nitrogen and phosphorus when we do our agriculture. We grow the corn, but then we take the corn off to market and all over the world, and that nitrogen and phosphorus isn't cycled back into the ground in that location. We're working on that, but that forces us to use a lot of fertilizers. If you use too much fertilizer and it washes off into the local waterway, you can get something called eutrophication, and we will spend a lot of time on eutrophication when we get to water pollution. But basically what happens with eutrophication is nutrients get into the water, it causes an algal bloom, the algae end up dying and kind of block the sunlight for other plants and they die. Causes a lot of decomposition. Decomposing bacteria are heterotrophs. They use up the oxygen in the water. Oxygen gets deprived, fishies go belly up, and the lake is sick, which all the green lakes you see around Florida, they're all eutrophic. If a lake is green, it's eutrophic. Lakes are not supposed to green. And if you watch the news at all this summer, you saw that actually some of our issues are even moving out into the ocean. Stop it, gentlemen. So even some parts of the ocean are starting to get eutrophic. And actually, we'll talk about that in a second because there's actually a huge dead zone out in the Gulf. Okay, so why are nitrogen and phosphorus so important? Because they're limiting resources. They actually are the ones that the animals, plants, and stuff run out of first. And therefore, they help to control the amount of growth of plants and stuff. In terrestrial environments, nitrogen is the first limiting factor, usually followed by phosphorus. In aquatic, they're flipped. Phosphorus is first, nitrogen is second. So if you have a lot of phosphorus and nitrogen ending up in the aquatic environment, usually that means the algae use it as a buffet and they take off and they cause eutrophication. Again, limiting factor, you plant some plants at home, they're not doing too well. It's probably because they don't have nitrogen, phosphorus. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are the three things you find in all fertilizers that you buy. Okay, one last thing and we're done with this. Dead zone. There's actually 5 major dead zones in the world. One of them is in our Gulf. There's a lot of little minor dead zones, but there's 5 big ones. Ours is huge. Basically what happens, which is the next page, or in this chapter, it talks about watershed. The watershed for the Mississippi River is almost the entire central part of the United States, which is a lot of agriculture. So you have a lot of agricultural chemicals and industrial chemicals ending up in that river. Fertilizers, pesticides, other kind of chemicals. And they all come down and they all dump into the Gulf. And that ends up making an area that is highly toxic and very low in oxygen because of all that, eutrophic. All of that excessive chemicals and stuff. And animals cannot live in that area. So here's a picture of a watershed. Okay, little hard to see. Okay, so here's, let's say this is the Mississippi. All of this area, and if we looked at a map of the United States, literally the whole center of the United States is the watershed for the Mississippi. So all of these chemicals, all of these pesticides, fertilizers, and all from all that farm area in the middle of the United States is running into the river and then dumps out into our Gulf, and it's created a large dead zone. Which is pretty nasty. Nothing can live there. You wouldn't want to fish in there. And to be completely honest, now we get about once a week to once a month that a dolphin washes up in the area that has died because it spent too long or was in the dead zone for too long, swam through it, kind of thing. Okay, I said that we were going to skip some vocabulary you need to know: disturbance, resistance, resilience, watershed, intermediate disturbance hypothesis, which is here. Let me just go over this real quick. Intermediate disturbance hypothesis. This will come back up when we do succession. But if you have a disturbance, let's say a fire, okay? If you have a lot of disturbance, so you have lots of fires, your biodiversity is going to be low because your population is kind of always recovering. If you're disturbance and you never have a fire, your biodiversity ends up being low because your most successful organisms take over and block everybody else. So to have a nice high biodiversity, which is what we want, you have to have kind of a middle ground disturbance. So ecosystems have to be disturbed every once in a while to actually be healthy. So fires, mudslides, droughts, those kind of things. It actually makes them healthy. And we'll talk more about this a little bit when we get to succession. Okay, really quick. Environment, ecosystem services. You have to be able to list environmental services things. One of the biggest ones is pollination. If we had to pollinate our crops, it would cost us billions of dollars, and our oranges would be would be $10 a pop, kind of thing. Our soil purifies our water, so we have clean drinking water. Our plants purify air and provide us with oxygen for respiration. A lot of our medicines come from or originate from nature. Aspirin is from a royal willow. Digitalis, which is an old heart drug, is from periwinkle? No, not periwinkle. Periwinkle produces something else. We get lumber, we get disease regulation, we get pest control, bats eat those mosquitoes, that kind of thing. So you need to be familiar with some of your ecosystem services because that pops up. Okay, I think that about wraps up chapter 3. Finish reading it up. Make sure you've read it all because, of course, you have a reading quiz on this. But we are done for tonight. Have a wonderful evening. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.